Okay, so the second part of chapter 7 deals with negotiation. And I'm going to talk about negotiation more broadly. Um, I'm not going to get into the context of international culture as deeply as I have with some of the other concepts because I do think that it's something that's really important to hit on. And I think all management majors have had a class on negotiation too. So I just kind of want to double up on some of these points, and I'll let you know in international situations when it's really important to know who you're negotiating with matters. So, to start off, negotiation is a process of bargaining where two parties or more have a solution. They bargain until they have an agreement, and that's what negotiation is. And so, um, it's about finding something that's acceptable to both groups. Now, the key that we want to know in this class is that there are two types of negotiation. There's distributive and integrative. Now, distributive is when two parties are competing over the solution, and the goal is kind of a winner take all or a zero sum game kind of approach to negotiation. Somebody's going to get the better deal in distributive. So I'm going to get into that in just a second. Now, integrative is more likely to be what big businesses, multinational corporations are going to do when they negotiate. Integrative are when win-win scenarios occur. It's about creating value, and the interests of both parties are kind of met with integrative negotiation. So let's look at it a little bit more. So distributive, I want you guys to think of distributed negotiation as kind of if you were to think about buying a car. Okay, your goal when you buy a car is to claim maximum value. You want to buy the most car for the least amount of money as possible. You want to give the dealership the least amount of money as possible. And the dealership, on the other hand, wants to take as much money from you as possible. And so the motivation is individual. It's, I want the most car for the least amount of money. And the interests between the parties are divergent. The dealership wants more money, and you want to give them less money. Okay? And here's the interesting thing about it, and this is why I suggest that it's really not something that I don't like thinking about business in terms like this, although sometimes you have to do it, especially when you're negotiating certain things for yourself. This is why I'm going over it. But it's a short-term relationship. The way that you think about your relationship with a car dealer, generally speaking, is very short-term. It's like, I'm going to make this deal, and then I'm never going to see this person again. Okay. And the outcome is a win-lose. If you tell someone the deal you got on a car, they're going to say, hey, that was a good deal, or that was an okay deal, or that was a bad deal. It's pretty clear who won, the dealer or the buyer. Integrative is something completely different. It's when two companies kind of merge and you have kind of this synergy thing. So it's about creating value. You're buying a company or you're merging with a company or you're negotiating for services that's going to make your company better. And so it's about the cooperation between both groups and how the interests overlap. You're creating a long-term relationship and both groups win. So completely different there. All right, the second thing that I want you guys to know about are the steps of the negotiation process. So I'm going to go over those: planning, relationship building, exchanging information, persuasion, which is the most important part of the negotiation process, and then ultimately the agreement. Okay, so planning is about ultimately finding what it is that you want. So how do we find what we want? We want to identify the objectives. Okay, and we also want to think about all the different ways that we can meet those objectives. Okay, so you have to define what it is that you want. So getting back to our example of a car, you kind of want to figure out what it is that you want to buy and where you can buy this type of thing from. Now, the next thing that you want, and this is probably the most important thing in planning, is to set a limit. And so anytime you're negotiating, you have to be able to set the maximum amount you're willing to spend or to give up. That comes at the before you even talk to anybody else. So this is during the planning stage. A lot of people want something and then they start to break limits that they have in their mind that they haven't really objectively made, and that's how they end up spending a lot more than what they were going to do. All right, so setting a limit is really key there. So short-term and long-term considerations. What is it that you want in the forefront, and kind of what is it that you want over a long period, and which of those is more important, right? And then you want to figure out how you want to go about discussing these objectives. So the planning part is what you can do all by yourself. It's essentially how you can, before you talk to anyone else, before you meet a salesperson or before you meet a representative from another country, all these things are what kind of goes down. Okay. Now, once you meet people, that's the relationship building part. Okay. And this is something that Americans are pretty bad at, because what we want to do is we want to get down to business and start talking business real quickly. You'll ask somebody, you'll realize this later on in your business careers. You'll ask somebody at lunch and you'll meet them at lunch. You'll discuss very few pleasantries before you get right down to the heart of the business transaction and negotiation that you want to take place. Okay. That's normal for us, but in other countries, that is not how it works. In other countries, small talk goes on and on and on for tons of different meetings. And small talk is used for a lot of different reasons, just to kind of measure out the person that you're dealing with, to find out kind of their weaknesses and strengths, but it's also to identify, before you get too deep into negotiating, who's reasonable and who's not. Americans are kind of bad at that, because we'll start negotiating with people and we'll waste a lot of time negotiating with people who aren't serious, or who are going to pull out of the deal at the last minute, or who don't even know what it is that they're giving up or getting. So they're going to cancel the deal at the end. So small talk is really important to kind of measure out who it is. And this is, in other countries, we see that you have to spend a lot more time than you do in America in order to relationship build. Now, exchanging information. A couple of things that I want to talk about here. One of the first things that you want to do is to let people know why you want what they have. What is it about there that's the most important thing? So if we get back to our kind of buying a car example, what is it that you want out of a car? It's really important to convey that to the dealer, so they're not trying to sell you something that has a ton of horsepower, if you're really looking for something that has a really high mile per gallon ratio. So you want to let them know what's critical for the negotiation process, what you're trying to get from them. And then the second part is kind of, what does the other person want from you? I mean, for the example of the car, it's not really a good example, because you know what the dealership wants from you. They want money. But it's not always the case when you're negotiating with other people, what people want. And the example of the orange is one that I have here. There's this great story of two sisters fighting over an orange, and they get really mad at each other and start, saying bad things to each other, making each other cry. And the mom comes in and says, "What's going on?" They said there's one orange left, and both sisters want the orange. And so the mom says, well, to one sister, "Why do you want the orange?" And she said, "Well, I want the flesh to be able to make some orange juice." And then she asked the other sister, "Why do you want the orange?" She said, "I want the peel to be able to make a pie." And so, long story short, they didn't need to fight. One wanted the flesh, one wanted the peel. If they had talked about what each wanted, it wouldn't have gotten to the point where they were being mean to each other. And that's not an extreme example. That's something that happens with tons of organizations, where they're very careful about trying to let other people know what it is that they want. Sports trades are exactly like this too. Sports trades can be win-win. What you see in some sports trades is a team that wants to rebuild is willing to give up a ton of their stars in exchange for draft picks. So I apologize if you're not a sports fan, but the Oakland Raiders are kind of going through this right now with their head coach and general manager John Gruden. He is trading away all of their superstars. They had a good team of young players, and he wants to start over. So he's trading all those young players for draft picks. And so the team that's getting the superstars from the Raiders is very happy. They want legitimate stars who can help out and win games. And the Raiders want something completely different. They want draft picks. They want to be able to choose their own players now that they have new leadership. Persuasion. This is the fourth step. And this is the most important step. Persuasion makes or breaks negotiation. So this is where, if you really want to learn how negotiation to win at negotiating, this is what you want to learn about. The most important thing about persuasion is understanding what the other side wants. If you understand and know, quote unquote, know your enemy, you are in such a better position than they are, because it's very unlikely that the other side knows exactly what you want. Right? They probably haven't asked for it and to get the information, and they probably don't care. All they care about is what they want. So anytime you go into a negotiation process, to learn what the other side wants is the most critical thing, and that's the most critical part of persuasion. So what you can do to make these steps move along is to figure out what it is that you guys agree and disagree on. So areas of agreement are important because you don't have to discuss them anymore. It's really important to know what you don't have to discuss anymore, because then you can focus on how you disagree. And to think outside the box, to be able to create new options. Okay, maybe you don't want this, but what about this? This is something that you might not even know exists in my company that has value. So persuasion is about creating new options, understanding what you disagree about, and kind of a willingness to work towards a solution that is agreeable to everyone, which is essentially what negotiating is. And then finally, you have agreement, which is the final phase of the process. And one of the things to remember about agreement, and this is something that it's not just like a deal is done. You don't just, hey, here's a handshake and it's done. Agreements are typically carried out one piece at a time. So you're kind of like getting back to the negotiating for a car thing. Okay, so you kind of negotiate maybe what you want to pay for your car, and you work that out. And then you want to trade in your old car, and then you work out that part. It never makes sense to kind of work all those things out together. If you do that, by the way, it's a huge advantage for the dealership. So you want to work out 1, 2, 3, 4 things at a time and carry those out piecemeal. And then when the agreement occurs, that's when everybody has reached a solution that's acceptable to all.